Hello everyone, and welcome to an advanced Django section. In this section, we'll be discussing class-based views. So this is your first advanced Django section, and basically what these advanced Django sections do is they take deeper dives into certain topics of Django. And in this particular section, we're going to be discussing class-based views, or CBVs. Previously, we've created views using functions in our views.py file. However, Django provides really powerful tools to use object-oriented programming, or OOP, and Python classes to define views in your views.py file. The class-based view method offers great functionality, and for most experienced users of Django, it's actually their default choice for creating views. So while I am calling this an advanced topic, if you go out into the real world, most experienced users of Django actually use class-based views as their default method. So if you ever look on GitHub for other Django projects, you're most likely to experience class-based views instead of function-based views. Now, it's much easier to understand class-based views after working with function views, which is why I'm calling this an advanced topic. Okay, we're going to start off with a simple example of a hello world class-based view, and then slowly build up to more complex examples, and then talking about something called mixins. Okay, hope you're excited. Let's get started. I'll see you at the next lecture. Everyone, and welcome to this Hello World class-based view lecture. What we're going to be doing in this lecture is just converting a simple Hello World function view into a class-based view to get to the idea of how they relate to each other. What we're also going to be doing is using the simplest available Django view class. Later on, we'll learn about more complex classes, but right now we'll keep it basic, and essentially what we're going to be doing in our views.py file is importing this view object, which is going to come from django.views.generic. We will also have to slightly change the way we call a class-based view in the urls.py file of our project. What we need to do is add in a .as_view method call off of the class, and this is an inherited method from the view that we mentioned earlier. If that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you right now, don't worry, it will all be very clear when we actually program this all out. Let's hop over to the editor, start a project, and get started. Okay, here I am at the Atom text editor, and as you can see here, I've already activated my virtual environment. So you can go ahead and do that. You don't have to do it if you already have the 1.10 version of Django in your normal environment. What we're going to do is create a new folder, say new folder, and I'm going to call this advanced_section. Doesn't really matter what you call it. Then I'm going to say cd into that advanced section, and here's where I'm going to call the Django admin. I will say Django-admin. And let's start a project. You can call this project whatever you want. I'll call it something simple like ADV CBV, so Advanced Class-Based Views. Hit enter and let that start the project. And then we'll also create a simple application. Eventually, what we're going to be doing with this project in later lectures of this section is creating models that kind of show a student within a class, or a school, I should say. Okay, so we have the advanced section. Let's cd into ADV CBV. And then what we're going to do now is, if I actually expand this window, I should be able to see it. So here I am in my project folder. Let's say Django-admin, and let's say start app. And I'm going to call this basic_app. You can really call it whatever you want. We're just going to be using one simple application for this project. Okay, so I have my basic app, and I have my advanced CBV project. What I'm going to do is come over to settings, open that up, and make sure that everything's linked as it should be. Later on, we'll also be creating templates in this, so we'll show you different ways of doing that, things that we haven't seen before. But if I scroll down to installed apps, I want to add in my basic_app there. Put a comma in case I install any more apps, and then let's save that. Perfect. And then while we're here, we're actually going to add in the templates as well. Like I mentioned, later on, we're going to show you a slightly different way of ordering your templates. Right now, we'll keep it the same as we've been doing. I will say template_dir is equal to os.path.join. I'm going to join that base directory with templates. And remember, we have to create templates. And then coming all the way down to where it says templates, the directory I want to pass in here is template_dir. So nothing new we haven't seen before. And at the same level as my project and my application, I will click create a new folder, and I will call it templates to match up that directory that I just linked to. Perfect. And then what I will also do is inside of this templates folder is create a new file, and we will call this index.html. This is going to be our home page. That's the first thing we're going to be showing. And let's kind of practice using template inheritance. So I'll create another file, and we'll call this base.html. So in the base.html, let's set up these two HTML files, and then what we're going to do is later on show you the class-based views, what we actually want to talk about. But to actually show a view, we need something to show, the index.html page and the base.html page. And we're going to be playing with these files later on in future lectures of this section, so let's just give them a nice title. We'll just call this base so that it's apparent what we're doing here. And then inside this body, let's create the block. And we'll call block. We'll call it body block. And then we're going to, outside of this, call end block. And remember, since I'm going to extend this in other files, essentially anything outside of this is also going to be called. So something that will be convenient to call is bootstrap. And instead of copying and pasting all the files, I'm just going to copy and paste the link. So as always, you can just grab this at getbootstrap.com. Version 3 is what I'm using here. You should be able to use version 4 as well with no problems. And what I'm going to do is also put everything inside a container class. So we'll say div container. Obviously on your own websites, you'll have to judge whether putting everything in a container like this is a good idea. But for what we're doing, kind of makes sense. So I will save this, and then in my index page, what I'm going to do is extend from that base.html that I just made. So we will say extends, and then pass in quotes base.html, that file, and then we're going to call the body block. We'll call, block first, if I can spell this right, and then body underscore block, and then we will call end block. And finally, the actual content we want. In this case, let's just put something like hello world, index page, home. Something really obvious that we're at the index.html homepage. Perfect. Now let's get to kind of the whole point of this lecture, the views.py file and the urls.py file. We'll start off just by creating a basic function view, and then we'll translate that into a class-based view. So underneath my basic app, I'll hit on views.py. Right now there's no views in it, so let's actually create one. We'll start off with the original function type view we've been using, which is def index request, and then return, render, pass in request, and let's just pass in that index.html page and save that. And then we'll come over to our project urls.py file. We won't create a urls.py file for our function folder yet, or excuse me, our application folder yet. So here in the project urls.py file, so advcbv urls.py, come down here and let's add in the pattern. I'll say from the basic app, or whatever you happen to call your application, import views, and then here I will call URL, and let's just set it up for the home page. So for that, it's just the domain page itself. So indexing, or regular expression wise, just that caret symbol $, and then we'll call views dot, and the only function in there is the index, which is exactly what we want. Let's save that. So I'm going to come back down to my terminal, and before I run the server, I want to make sure I make my migrations. I'll call Python manage.py and say migrate, hit enter. Should see some stuff coming on the screen, just a little bit. You can see here that some SQLite databases are being created, which is exactly what we want. That's working just fine. And then once that is complete, I always like to say Python manage.py, and we'll call make migrations on our application, which in this case is basic underscore app. And we haven't actually added any models or anything, so it'll say no changes detected. I'm a little always paranoid about that, so I just do it anyways. And then, like I mentioned, I'm always a little paranoid, so then I just say migrate again, make sure everything is right. So once we see no migrations to apply, we should be ready to go. So let's see if we actually can make this work. So I will say Python manage.py, and I'm going to ask it to run the server. And hopefully we see that URL pop up. There it is. Let's copy and paste this and make sure that our home page is working. And then bringing in my browser over here, it says hello world index page home. It's in a nice container, looks good, perfect. So we know our function-based view is working. Now let's kind of turn it into a class-based view, which is actually pretty simple. Let me show you what we can do. I'll come back to my views.py file. Okay, so back here at the views.py file, I have this index view function. What I'm going to do is replace this with a class-based view. And I will say from django.views.generic import, and the most basic view class you can call, is just view. So capital V, view. And then I'm going to delete all of this. And instead of actually calling the index.html file, what I'm going to do is just give a very basic HTTP response. Not something you'll be doing often, but I want to show you the most basic class-based view you can possibly do. So here we're calling class. This is object-oriented programming. So if this is confusing to you, review those lectures. And then I'm going to inherit from view. And here I'm going to say def get self, because it's a method inside this class, and then I will take in the request. And then what I'm going to do is return an HTTP response. So in order to do that, I will say from Django.http import HTTP response. So when we're dealing with class-based views lectures later on in this course, we actually won't be doing this. We'll be doing something that's actually much simpler, but I kind of want to show you the grittier way or the more manual way of doing this. So we'll say return HTTP response, and then we'll say class-based views are cool! Exclamation. So then what is actually happening here? Well, when your urls.py file calls views.index, we actually need to change that. Instead of calling views.index, since that function is no longer here, we need to call the cbView class. Let's do that. So in here, I'm going to delete this line where it says views.index, and I'm still importing views from my basic app, but what I need to do is add in views dot, and then cbView, which was the name of that class we just did, and the other thing I have to do is as underscore view close parentheses, and then let's have another set of parentheses to close off this URL function. And this is the main method that you're going to see in the urls.py file. As we learned about other ways of creating class-based views, essentially in the urls.py file, this isn't going to change. You'll always say views dot, the name of your class-based view, and then you'll say dot as view close parentheses. And this basically tells Django, okay, grab that class and then show it as a view. So coming back here, it's going to grab this, and then what it's going to call is they'll say get, grab that request, and just return this response. Class-based views are cool. Notice that we're actually not even returning a template. We'll show how to do that in the next lecture, but this is the most basic class-based view you can possibly get. So let's save all our changes here. Big things to note is that we're using a class-based view, and we're calling this views, the class name, dot as view. That's essentially the main thing I want you to get out of this lecture before we head on to the next one. We'll say Python, manage.py, run our server, hit enter. Let's bring in that browser, and I'm going to bring that in, and here it is. Class-based views are cool. This is just the most basic HTTP response. We usually won't be doing something like this, but now you know how to make a very basic class-based views. Now you might be thinking, well, it's not so great. In fact, class-based views look a little more complicated to me than that older function-based view. Well, that's because we haven't talked about generic template-based views, and those are going to be an awesome tool that is going to save you so much time. And it's kind of the main reason that people eventually don't use function-based views at all, and they use class-based views for everything. So if this doesn't convince you yet, don't worry. I think the next lecture will really convince you to switch everything over to class-based views, which is essentially what we're going to be doing for the rest of the course and those clone projects. Okay, thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture where we discuss those template views. Welcome to the template views lecture for the class-based views section of the course. It's now time to learn how to use the template view object that comes with Django. Previously, we just called in the basic view object from those generic views. Now we're going to learn how to use the template view, and it's really going to make calling templates a breeze, very easy. Now let's see a comparison between using a function to call a template as we have in the past versus using the template view object. So previously, for a function-based view that called some sort of template, you had to say the def, name of that view function, pass in the request, and then somewhere along the line you returned a render of that request plus the actual template you wanted to return. For a class-based template view, it's also really easy, and I would argue even easier than that function. You just create the class, call it whatever you want, in this case we'll just call it index view, and you inherit the template view object after importing it, and then you just set the class object attribute template underscore name equal to whatever the template you want to return, in this case index.html. Okay, let's show the basics of this and also show you how you can use a template class-based view along with a context dictionary. I'll hop over to the editor and get started. Okay, back at our editor, let's start by opening up views.py in our application. So far we showed that very basic class-based view with a simple HTTP response, but usually you're going to want to return the templates themselves. So we can delete all that, and we can also delete the HTTP response, we won't be using it. And instead of just importing view, what we're going to import is template view. we can do that from Django.views.generic. So this is still known as a generic view. And we'll start off with creating the class. And we'll call it index view. And we will inherit the template view instead of just the normal view from before. And then all we have to do to match something up is you say the template underscore name class object attribute. And then you just pass in the actual template you want. So for instance, right now under my templates folder, I have index.html. But maybe if you had it under templates and then your application, so it would look something like basic underscore app / index.html, etc. Right now, since I just have it under under templates, I don't actually have a subdirectory there. We'll just call index.html, and I'm going to save this, and that's it. That's all we have to do in the views.py file. And then coming back to our urls.py file, you just scroll down here, and instead of saying cb view, I will call that index view. And remember, we always have to call it as view. So let's save that as well. And just to make sure this is working, I will call index.html and say something like testing template view. Save that. And now let's actually run the server. I'm going to cd into advanced section, cd into adv cbv, and now I'll call python manage.py and run my server. Hit enter, and let's actually make sure that's running. Okay, looks like it's operating. We'll copy and paste this into our browser and bring over our browser. Okay, bring it in the browser. Perfect. We get testing template view, and it's all working correctly. So now what you probably want to know is how do I actually use a context dictionary? A big part of using templates is injecting content into the actual template. So let's walk through how to do that. Later on, we're also going to be discussing things like detailed views, list views, which actually help you a lot, but this is the most basic way to do it with a template view. I'll do Control-C to stop running that server. And in here, let's say h2, and we'll put in injected content. And here I'll have something like inject me, which will be the key for our context dictionary that we're going to be working with in just a little bit. So my plan is inject something into this index.html page. So I'll come back to views.py, and the way to do this is pretty particular, but it's actually not so bad. You create a method called get underscore context underscore data, and since this is a method in OOP, you pass in self, and then you pass in kwargs. So you pass in asterisk asterisk KWARGS. And let me take a brief moment to actually explain this sort of syntax that we haven't seen before. 2 asterisk signs and then kwargs. And you may have also seen something that's just 1 asterisk sign and args. So in Python, basically what's going on here is the actual syntax is just 1 asterisk or 2 asterisks. Whatever you pass after that doesn't really matter, it can be your choice. But by convention, you always see 2 asterisks with kwargs for keyword arguments, or 1 asterisk with just arguments. So let's talk about what this actually means, this keyword arguments. And I'm going to do that by kind of opening up a Stack Overflow link. Let's hop to that now. All right, so I'm at the Stack Overflow link where someone basically answered the question, what do this single asterisk and double asterisk mean? And let's start off with the single asterisk, even though we won't be using it right now. But basically what this does is it gives you all the function parameters as a giant tuple. So if you have 1 star, 1 asterisk with args inside of a function call, so here you see a very basic function, foo, and it accepts args. Basically what happens is, for a and args, you can do something. So it passes this all in as a tuple. And you might be thinking, well, why do you need that? Well, sometimes for a function, you don't want to have a set number of inputs. You want to be able to take as many inputs as necessary. And in that case, you can use args. So here, we pass in 1, it just prints out 1. If we pass in 1, 2, 3, foo doesn't care. Since you said args, it'll just say print out 1, print out 2, print out 3. It's basically a way that you can prepare the function to accept more than 1 argument. And it passes that all in as a tuple. And then the keyword argument, or using double asterisk sign, gives you corresponding dictionaries. So it's just kind of an advanced method, or not necessarily advanced, but kind of building on top of that concept. So we have keyword arguments, and that's denoted by 2 asterisk sign. And here we can see a very simple function. It's just called bar, and the input it accepts is 2 stars, 2 asterisk signs, and keyword args, KW-args. And then it says for a, in the keyword arguments, print a, and then, like a dictionary call, print the actual value for that key at a. And basically what this allows you to do is have the user define parameters as they go along. So here they can say, okay, name is going to be equal to 1, age is equal to 27. Now when you were creating that function, you never said there's going to be a name parameter or an age parameter. What this keyword argument allows us to do is actually have the user define those, and then essentially what we get back when we use keyword arguments is a dictionary, where you can print out A, the key they gave, in this case it's age, and the keyword argument, which is 27. Now remember that dictionaries don't retain any order, which is why you see it printed out in some random order, in age 27 and name 1. Okay, you can check out another Stack Overflow page. Just Google search what is quargs or what is args, in case that doesn't make sense to you. But essentially what it's allowing us to do is take keyword arguments and treat them as a dictionary. So I'm going to bring this aside now, and let's continue back with using quargs. And what we will do here is call context equal to, and we're going to use the super function that's built into Python, and then we'll say get context data, and then pass in keyword arguments. And if you're kind of having trouble with just understanding what's actually going on here, you don't actually need to know it on a deeper level. You essentially just need to do copy and paste this line, because the work you're going to be doing happens on this next line, which is the typical context dictionary that we've seen before. You pass in the key, inject me, which matches what we wrote on the index.html page, and then whatever you want to inject. So either a list or an item. Later on, we'll see how to grab stuff from our model, but we'll just call this basic injection, and then we just return that context dictionary. And that's how you can use a context dictionary with a template view. And like I mentioned, with list views and detail views that we'll learn about in the next lecture, you will have to worry about this even less. I'm just showing you the very basic way of doing it with a template view. So don't worry too much if this particular line 8 or keyword arguments doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you. Later on, we'll see much easier ways of dealing with this. I'm going to save views.py, and notice here I called context inject me, and if I go over to index.html, I have this inject me key. So I should see when I actually run the server again, this injected content, and it'll say basic injection in all caps. So let's call python manage.py, run the server, and then bring in our browser again. And here it is. We see testing template view, injected content, and then basic injection in all caps. Great. And those are the very basics of returning a template with a context dictionary. That's really all you need to know. Usually, however, you're going to be dealing with a combination of models and forms, and you'll want to either list out every object in that model or list out a particular object with all its details. And what we're going to be learning about in the next lecture is another generic view, probably the two most common ones, which is a list view and a detail view. And they're going to be building off this idea of the template view, essentially setting some sort of convenient class object attribute and then just being able to call convenient methods off of that to create very easy views. And detail view and list view are going to make your life a lot easier. But to see them, what we have to do is create models, which we'll talk about in the next lecture, and then link them up to those views. Okay, hopefully by now you have a very basic understanding of the power of class-based views. And in the next lecture, we'll show you more of their convenience features. Thanks, I'll see you at the next lecture. Everyone, and welcome to List Views and Detail Views. We've learned how to use class-based views to directly show a template. But what about models in your application? Often when you have models, we want to either list the records from the model or show details of a single record in that model's database. And previously we did this with calls using that object relation mapper directly. And that was back when we were doing things such as calling mymodel.objects.all. That's how we used to connect a template to an actual call to the model to show information from the database. However, you can imagine that these sort of operations are very common. And they're so common that Django has some generic view classes you can inherit from to actually very quickly display information from your model. And this is where the power of class-based views really comes to help us out. So if you haven't been convinced yet that class-based views are worth the tiny bit of extra effort, after this lecture, I really think your opinion is going to change and you'll probably never want to go back to function-based views. Okay, so in this lecture what we're going to be doing is quickly creating some new models to actually show off these features, as well as some new templates. And then we're going to focus on two generic views, which is the list view and the detail view. So far we've only seen view and template view. Now we're going to learn about list view and detail view, which will allow us to connect to the models, which we're going to be creating also in this lecture. And then previously, we've been putting all our templates inside the templates folder within the matching app folder. And what we're also going to do in this lecture is show you the common practice, which is essentially the reverse. Have a template folder inside of the applications folder. So to say it another way, Previously, we had that templates folder, and then inside of that, you had your matching application folder, and then inside of that, you had those .html files. It's really common in the real world to have it essentially the reverse way. So under your application folder, that has its own templates folder, and under that, you have your HTML files. So we're going to show an example of doing that in this lecture as well. And this is going to basically set you up to be able to read other real-world projects. So if you're ever browsing GitHub and see someone's Django project, most likely they'll be using class-based views, especially list and detail view, and they'll have the template structure that we're going to show in this lecture. Okay, so there's a lot to cover. Let's get started by hopping over to the Atom text editor. All right, so the first thing to actually show a list view and a detail view is to create the models that they're going to report back. So let's come over to models.py in our basic app folder, and let's create those models. I'm going to try to mimic some sort of school administration website. So maybe we'll have a class, school, and that will say models.model. And then we're going to have 3 fields. We'll have a name of the school, and that will be models, and that will be a character field. And we can give it a max length if we want. Let's just say 256, doesn't really matter for our case. And then every school also has a principal of that school. And we'll say models dot a character field. And what the heck, let's also give it a max length for that principal's name. And then every school is also going to have a location. So models dot, that's also a character field. We'll give it a max length, 256 as well. And then if we remember from talking about models, we usually want to have a string representation of that model in case we ever want to print it out. So we'll create that special method, str, and I will say return self.name. All right, looking good on that school. And schools have students, so let's create another model. We'll call it class, student. Let me make a couple new lines here so we can see this all typed out. And then I'll inherit from models.model. And let's give these students 3 fields. So the student themselves are going to have a name. We won't worry about last name or first name. Just keep things simple right now. And let's give these students' name a max length of 256 as well. I'm choosing that number arbitrarily. All right, and another attribute a student can have is an age. And what we're going to do is call models, and something we haven't seen before as a field is the positive integer field. Let me make sure I spell that right. Integer field. And we won't provide any more arguments there because basically what the positive integer field, as you may have guessed, just is a positive integer. Makes sense because ages can't be negative, and since these are essentially, we'll call them elementary school kids, we don't care if they're 11.5 years old, we'll just say they're either 11, 12, etc. And each student is going to be assigned a school, and that will be then a foreign key field because we want it to match up to the school object up here, or the school model I should say, which means we pass in school, and we can also pass in a related name parameter that will allow us to call this later on. So we'll say related name is students, and let's have a string. So if you ever print out a student, we'll probably just return that student's name, self.name. Okay, pretty simple stuff here. You have the school model, has a name, a principal, a location, and then we have name, age, and school for the student, and that's basically it. And what we want to do is register these in our admin.py file. So let's open up admin.py under basic app, and I will import from basic app.models, import school, comma, student. And then I will call admin.site.register, and it's lowercase, and we'll pass in school, and we're going to do the same thing for student. So admin.site.register student. That way I can just quickly call the admin and add some students and add some schools. You can also create a population.py file to auto-populate this using Faker, but things are just simple right now. Let's focus on the class-based views. So I'll just do those manually in the admin. In order to confirm that this all worked, I'm going to create a super user, start up my server, and then actually add some students and schools to this. So first thing I want to do is say Python manage.py and migrate. Okay, perfect. And then I'll say Python. It told me to say make migrations, which makes sense. We'll say make migrations, basic underscore app, hit enter. It created the model school, created the model student, perfect. and then we'll say python manage.py and migrate one more time. And it's applying all those migrations. Looks like it worked out well. Finally, I want to create a super user, python manage.py, create super, whoops, let me make sure I spell that right. Create super user. We'll say Jose, whatever password is fine, just hello@gmail.com. Password, I'll use test password, and I'll type that in again. Great, so now my super user is ready to go. I've migrated the databases. Let's add in some schools and students to make sure everything's working properly. I'll type in python manage.py, run the server, and then bring in my browser. Okay, bringing in that browser, I can still see stuff from the template view. We're going to change this later on, but what I'm more concerned about is going to that admin page. Perfect, Django administration. Let's log in. And then we can see here I have schools and students. So what I will do is I'm going to add some schools and add some students to those schools. So let's create a school. We'll call this school, whoops, first school, principal, Mr. John, wherever, and we'll say it's based in San Francisco, or let's just say San Fran because I don't want to type too much, and we'll save that. Let me expand this all the way, and let's create one more school. We'll call this new second school, principal, say Mrs. Smith, and its location, we'll say New York. Obviously, it doesn't really matter what values we put in here. So there are our first schools. Let's come back to basic app, and let's add in some students. So I'm going to add a student, and first student, we'll just call them, let's call him Mikey, or Mike, whatever, 10 years old, and I'm going to assign him to a school from this drop-down menu. Mikey goes to that first school, and let's add 2 students per school. So we'll have John, he'll be 12 years old, also goes to first school, save that, and then let's come back up here, whoops, actually, let's stay at students, and we'll put in some more students. We'll say Lauren is 11 years old, and we'll have her go to new second school, and then add a student, and I'll call Sarah, whatever, 9 years old, doesn't really matter, new second school. So I assign 2 girls' names to the second school. That way I make sure that everything's working when I work with stuff on the front end, and I assign 2 boys' names to the first school. It really doesn't matter. It should be apparent to you however you do this. So we'll come back home. Everything's ready to go. I'm going to log out, and then let's jump back into the Atom text editor and continue by actually working with the class-based views and then pointing the URLs to them. All right, so as I mentioned in the slides portion of this lecture, it's very common to have a templates folder underneath the application those templates belong to. So we're going to show that paradigm of creating the templates folder that way instead of just having a single template with the base files. So what we're going to do is we'll keep base.html and index.html under the templates folder. Note that they're not underneath a subdirectory of the basic app. Instead, we'll say that templates that relate to the basic application are going to be underneath their own templates folder. So we will say basic app, new folder, and we'll call it templates. And then it's also common that underneath this templates, you add in another folder that matches the application name. Now there's various ways to do this, and what I would recommend is you actually check out the documentation page on different conventions, and there's also a great book called 2 Scoops of Django, which has its own conventions for setting up a project and setting up file formats. And there's also something called Cookie Cutter Django that you may also want to Google and check out, which kind of shows some boilerplate Django. Again, this is kind of a thing where it's your own personal preference, so I don't want to actually give any hard guidelines here on you have to do it this way. It really depends on the scope of your project and how self-contained you want applications to be. So this method, the applications are a little more self-contained because the templates are going to be underneath the applications folder, which is nice if we intend to use this application for another project. But if you're doing a small project, maybe you don't need all of this. So keep that in mind. There's no right or wrong way to do stuff here. Okay, continuing on, underneath this basic folder, I'll create 3 new files. I'll create some basic app base.html that I will extend from. And then I'll also create a new file, and I'll create a school detail.html file. And then I'm also going to create a school list file. So new file, school list.html. So those are 3 HTML files, and what I'm going to do right now is play around these HTML files and make sure everything is set up for those class-based views. And in order to actually do that, we have to create those class-based views. So let's hop back over to views.py. And you can kind of do this in any order you want. Essentially, we have 3 main tasks left. That's set up the remaining class-based views, set up those HTML template files, and then also set up the urls.py to point the views to those new templates we created. So we have those 3 things left to do. There's no right order to do them in, since they kind of all codepend on each other. So something we'll just start off with is the actual class-based views themselves. And the first thing we're going to do is say from django.views.generic is import, instead of view or template view, the list view, and then the detail view. And these are going to be 2 views that you use all the time. In fact, list view and detail view are pretty much the most common generic views you'll see in other people's Django projects. They're really so useful that people use them all the time. And let's try to make the argument and show the motivation why. I'll create a class, school list view, pass in list view, and then I will connect it to a model. And we just have to say model is equal to, and then the actual name of the model. And that means that I actually need to import models. So I will say from dot import models. What I could have also done is say from basic underscore app import models. Dot just means look in the current directory. Dot is a little nicer in case you ever want to change the actual name of stuff here. Okay, so we will say model is equal to models.school. And we will save that. And believe it or not, that is all you have to do, and you will be provided with a list of every record in this model. That's it. That list view does all the work for you. Okay, so now let's show what a detail view looks like. We'll say class, school detail view, and then pass in a detail view. And we'll also connect it to model is equal to models.school. And then let's provide it with a template underscore name. So you can see how list view and detail view are kind of related to the template view in the fact that they can take the same class object attribute, template underscore name, and this is where we're going to point it to the template. In this case, it goes under basic app / school underscore detail.html. That was a template we just made underneath the basic app's own templates folder, basic app folder. And that sort of organization makes using this detail view and list view a little easier, which is why you sort of see that more common in the real world. Okay, so we'll leave these like this for now, and what we're later going to show is how you can use the context object name class attribute. So I'll leave that out for now, but we'll come back to this. We're not finished with this views.py file just quite yet, but I will save it for now. Okay, so we still have to work with the templates we made, those various HTML files, and we still have to work with the urls.py file to connect the views to those new templates. This is a good cutting off point, and we'll continue all of this right where we're leaving off here in the next lecture. Thanks, and if you have any questions, feel free to post to the Q&A forums, and make sure to also check the notes that belong to this lecture. We're going to continue right where we left off. Previously, we had finished setting up these 2 class-based views, and we set up the models as well. We have the list view, which is going to list out all the schools that are in the school model. And then we also have the school detail view, which is going to show all the details of a specific entry in that school model database. And that includes things like showing all the students for a particular school. What we need to do is set up the templates and then set up the urls.py file. So it really doesn't matter what order you do this in. You can set up the urls.py file first and then set up the templates, or do the templates first and then set up the urls.py. It makes sense either way since they're basically codependent on each other. We'll start off with the templates, and we should always start off with the base template. That makes the most sense since we're going to be extending that into the other pages. So I'm right now under the templates folder that's in the same directory level as the project and the application. So there's my project folder, application folder, and then templates folder, base HTML, and index HTML. Let's take care of this. What would be nice to add in here is a navigation bar that can take us to the various pages. So we'll call nav, and we will give this class equal to, and this is one of those kind of quirky bootstrap names. It's navbar space navbar dash default, and then we'll say navbar dash static dash top. And then inside of this navbar, we have an unordered list, And that also takes in a special bootstrap class, which, again, quirky name, navbar-nav. Okay, so let's have 3 items in this actual navbar. So we'll have 3 list elements inside of this unordered list, and each of these is actually also going to be an anchor tag, since they're going to link to other pages on our page. And what we're going to be doing is using URL template tagging. But before we do that, let's actually give these anchor tags their bootstrap classes. The first one is going to be navbar-brand. Remember, this is kind of the brand that usually takes you back to the home page. In our case, what we're going to do is once we set up the urls.py file, we will have a URL inside the basic app, and we'll give it the list. And let me collapse the directory tree here for a second so we can see everything here. And I'm going to give this the name schools. So in our navbar, all the way to the left as the brand, there's going to be larger text that says schools, and if someone clicks on that, they should then see a list of all the schools. And that utilizes the list view. Then we're going to have 2 more links here, and this will just be navbar-link as the class. And inside of this is going to be another URL template. And this is just going to be to the admin page. In case we ever want to quickly go to the admin page, I can say admin:index, and let's just make this say admin. So that takes us directly to the admin page, and we'll just have an empty thing right here, because later on we'll add a 3rd link, but right now we can just keep it empty. And I'm actually going to do Control-A or Command-A, depending on your operating system, and then copy all of this. So select it all, copy it, and I'm going to bring it into under Basic App, Templates, Basic App _base. I'm going to paste that all in here because I essentially want it to have the same navigation bar in the basic app base.html. So I will save that. And now let's come back to our home page. This is index.html under the templates folder that's in the same directory as the project. And I'm going to just get rid of all this. And let's put in a Jumbotron and say something like homepage. Save that. And right now, base.html and index.html are done. Let's go to basic app base, school detail, and school list and see how we can add something to those templates. So we'll start off with the school list.html. And what we're going to do here is say extends, and we'll extend from basic_app/basic_app_base.html. And that matches the base HTML file for our specific templates application. Or I should say application templates. And we'll start off the block. So we'll call block body_block. And then because we're calling that, we also want to make sure we call an end block. And now what we can do is say header 1. And we'll call this welcome to a list of all the schools. Save that. And then what I will do here is have an ordered list. And inside this ordered list, I'm going to have template tagging with a for loop. I'll say for school in school_list. I'll say h2, have some heading here, a list item, h2 just so it looks a little larger instead of just a paragraph. And then we'll have this be even like a link. But right now we'll just say school and then grab the name of that school. And let me end that for, so the end for should go here. So I'm going to say end for. And what you're probably wondering right now is, where does this term come from, school_list? Well, we're familiar with context dictionaries, but you probably don't remember us actually defining school_list in the context dictionary of views.py. So if I jump over to views.py, here inside this school list view, we don't see any mention of the variable school_list. So again, where does this actually come from, school_list? Do we have to define this by ourselves with some sort of call to a context dictionary? And the list view object right here that we inherit from actually is doing the work of creating that context dictionary and returning it for you. In fact, what it does is it takes the model you called, lowercases everything, and then adds _list. So for instance, if I'm calling models.school, essentially what it's doing, and this is just going to be in comments, it returns a list with the name school underscore list. So this thing lowercase, and then it adds in underscore list. Now, if you're working by yourself, that may be fine, but usually for larger projects, you have someone working with the front end and another person working on the back end, or teams, etc. And you want to make sure that you're not constantly changing stuff, and maybe they're not even aware of list views and things being called as an underscore list. So it might be better if you decide on your own terms what you want this actual object to be called. So what might make sense is for this to be called schools. Well, how do we actually affect views.py to call the context object that gets returned whatever we want? Thankfully, it's really easy. What you end up doing is using a class object attribute. So here, you just say context underscore object underscore name is equal to, and then whatever you want. In this case, we wanted schools. So here you can define your own context object name that's going to return the list of all the schools inside that model school. So if you come back here, then we can just match this up with schools. Okay, and that's probably usually what you're going to be seeing. That way you're fully under control and you never have to worry about matching up to the model name. You know exactly what you're calling and you have more flexibility over it. While we're at it, let's do the same thing for school detail view. So here, I will call this context object name equal to school underscore detail. Now you might be wondering, well, if list takes the model name and then adds an underscore list to it as the default context return, what does detail view return? Well, detail view actually just returns the model lowercase, so that's it. So it would just return school lowercase. List views return school underscore list. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions, you can check out the documentation, which actually has a really nice example of this, or you can also just post to the Q&A forums. But the basic idea here is if you're ever confused on what the context was called, you just set it yourself. Context underscore object underscore name equal to whatever you want to call it. All right, so we have our list view, and this returns a list of all the records inside models.school. So coming here, since this is a list, I know I can say for school and schools, and then do something with school.name. Okay, so this is fundamentally different than what we've done before, because usually we would have to have said, grab something from a context dictionary and call .objects.all. But basically, listing is such a common exercise that the list view is doing it automatically in what they're returning to you. Okay, so that's the basics of using the list view for what we need to do. And that's all we're going to do for now with the school list HTML. Now let's come over here to the actual school detail.html. And what we will do is call extends from, and in quotes here we'll pass in basic underscore app slash basic underscore app underscore base.html. Whoops. And then let's start off our block. So we'll call block. It's the body block we're calling. And then let's call end block. And in here what we're going to do is play around with the school details. So we'll have a header one that says, in fact, let's put this all in a Jumbotron. You probably noticed throughout the course that I'm kind of a big fan of the way the Jumbotron looks. Probably too much of a big fan. Probably don't want to use Jumbotrons as often as I do, but for teaching, they make things really clear because you get this nice little center Jumbotron. But now, inside this heading one, we'll say, welcome to the school detail page. And here's where we're going to return details about the school. So we'll create heading 2 and say school details. And in paragraphs, what we're going to do is this. We'll have a template tag here. And remember, the context dictionary we returned was called school underscore detail. That's what we defined over here in views.py. I called school underscore detail, which means that's what this is. It's the actual school itself. We don't need to say objects or anything. So what I'm going to do is call the name of the school, and we'll call this name. And then let's add in a couple more things. Remember, the schools also have principals to them. So we'll say principal and inject school underscore detail dot principal. Hopefully I'm spelling everything correctly. If not, we'll have to do a little debugging. Then another paragraph here, and I'm going to call location. And we'll call school detail dot location. Make sure that matches the whatever you call the fields in your models.py file. And then what we're going to do is, actually we'll just leave it like that for now, and we'll come back to this and add some more detail to it later. But here we can see we have those actual details. Now let's go to the urls.py file and set a few things up. Okay, we have the basics set up, so let's match over to our urls.py file and actually make sure everything's working correctly. So underneath our project, we have the project urls.py file. So we'll scroll all the way down, we see URL patterns, we see that original views.index view that we created. We'll keep that for the home page, and what we're going to do is call the URL function, regular expression, caret, and then what we will say is basic_app / and then we're going to use the include function, which means we actually need to import it. So we'll say include here. Let's get a little space there, save that. And then I'm going to say include basic_app.urls. And we can provide a namespace for this if we ever need to refer to it later. And we can just call it basic_app. So we shall save that. And now what this is going to do is allow us to reach over to the basic apps urls.py file, which we actually haven't created yet. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm right-clicking on my basic app top directory, saying new file, and calling urls.py, just as we've done in the past. And here now our basic application is going to have its own urls.py file. And what we need to do is say from django.clnf.urls, import URL, and then I will say from basic, from basic_app, import those views. And remember, I'm going to use app name is equal to basic_app. And if you don't remember why I'm doing that, it's because in the templates themselves, especially the navbar, if I go over to the base navbar, remember when I'm doing things like this, basic app, list, and then admin, index, etc., that sort of notation can only be done if I remember to set this app name. So now that that's ready to go, we'll say URL patterns is equal to a list. And let's start with just one link here, regular expression, and we'll just show the list view for now. We won't worry about the details page. And let's say, views.school list view. And remember, we have to say as view because it's a class-based view, and we can give it the name list. So what's the reason for giving it the name? That's for the URL template tag. So here I have the basic app name list. So basic app : list, that comes back to the base.html file for this, basic app : list. Hopefully by now you're beginning to see those connections and how everything kind of works together. Let's actually test if this all worked by running the server. I'm going to say Python, let me actually cd first into the advanced section and then cd into our project. Now I'm going to say Python manage.py and then run the server, see if we get any errors. Looks like it's thinking about it. And the error we get is basic app.views has no attribute index view. So I may have accidentally deleted that. Let's come back to our views.py file and make sure I didn't delete it. Whoops, looks like I did. No problem. Luckily, with template view, it's easy to fix. We'll say class index view, and I'm just going to inherit the template view, and I'll set template name equal to index.html. And you can review back to the template view lecture if you want more information about this, but you can see here that basically took care of the problem. So I accidentally deleted this, and I didn't have to. So now I'm going to copy this and put it in my browser. Let's see if everything worked. Okay, here I am at my browser. Looks like the home page is working. We fixed the index view. Good news. Now let's click on schools. And then bingo! Welcome to a list of all the schools. One first school, new second school. Perfect. So we can see here that our list view is working correctly. And again, just as a quick reminder of what's actually happening here, usually when we wanted to list through everything in a model, we would have to have called that model.objects.all, etc. What list view does for us is it puts that all in this nice convenient context object name called schools. So then I can just say for blank in schools, then list stuff off of that. So again, listing stuff in your model, every entry is so common that that's already all built in for you in these 3 lines of code here. You connect the model, and you don't even have to say context object name. That's only the option if you want to have your own context. Okay, now let's check out the admin page before we actually talk about the detail view. So I'm going to log back into this, and then Jose test password, perfect. And inside our administration page, if we look at basic app, we have the schools and students. And if I click on students, notice that we never actually set a primary key when we were developing that model. We set a foreign key that matched to the school, but we didn't actually set a primary key. And for this particular application, that kind of actually makes sense. We wouldn't want to set the name of the student as a primary key because students may share names. Sarah may be a common name between two girls, and we wouldn't want the model getting confused that we have matching primary keys there. So instead, what we end up doing is not defining one. And if you don't define a primary key, what Django does in the background for you is it sets an ID, which is just a serial number marker. So the first entry you put in is 1, the second entry is 2, second entry is 3, and it just has that unique identifier, that primary key, as a single number, which means we can call .id off of it either for student or for school, since actually for neither of them we set up a primary key. So let's log out, and I'm going to come back to the Atom text editor, do Control-C here, and again, just to reiterate, if I come to models.py, none of these fields did I ever indicate that it was a primary field. The only thing I indicated was that the student had a foreign key in school. But since none of them were actually primary keys or primary fields, then what Django did in the background was set an ID for every entry, which is just a numerical indicator. And we can use that to actually link for a couple things. So this is where we're going to really show off how convenient list views and details views can be. If I come back to school list, what would be nice if I click on the school, then it takes me to the school's particular detail page. And so what we need to do is come to school list, and inside of this h2li, I'm going to pass in an anchor tag. And this anchor tag is going to have the school name as its text. So it's going to say, for school in schools, it's going to list all the schools. So we've already seen that page, but we're actually going to give it href. And what this href is going to be is school.id, which is essentially just a number for that school. So keep that in mind. We're going to use this later with the urls.py with regular expressions in a way that we haven't actually seen before yet. But here we have the school name. That makes sense to us. That's just the name of the school. But it's linking to essentially a number. And we're going to use that in just a second in the urls.py file. But before we do that, we also want to make sure that our details.html file is ready. So school_detail.html. Here I have schooldetails.principal.location. That's looking good as well. What I'm going to say is also list off all the students that this particular school has. So we'll create heading 3 here, and we'll say students. And then the next thing to do once I have students is actually cycle through the students. So if I want to cycle through something, I need to use a for loop. I will say for student, and you can use whatever variable you want. Student is fine for us. And then we'll say in school_detail. Remember, school_detail is that context we're returning from views.py. And I will call .students.all. And then I'm going to just create a paragraph element with the student name, and we'll say, so that, like Mary, Sam, who is, we'll call student.age years old. So we should see something that says Mary, who is 11 years old, etc. And then whenever you have a for loop, you need to end it. And we'll say end for. Now, something you may be wondering is where the heck does .students come from? We know where school_detail comes from. That comes from views, where we just return school_detail. But if we come to .students.all, how do we actually get to that? Well, if you go back to models.py, remember that we added this related name, and that relates the actual school to the students. So we pass it in with a foreign key, and we pass in the related name. So I can call back in my school detail page the actual context of the school .students.all, and it's going to grab anything of that matching foreign key. In our case, all the students who had that related name, students. That sort of notation can be confusing at first, but again, it's really just a related name that's connecting this foreign key with school, so that school can be linked to all of the students that belong to that school. So you just call that related name, students, and then say .all to grab all of them over here in this in school detail.students.all. Alright, so we have our school list, and what we need to take care of in the urls.py file is actually working with this school.id. And that's where regular expressions are going to help us a lot. I'm going to come over here to the applications urls.py file, and inside of this, what I'm going to do is, whoops, this is the projects urls.py file. I want my applications, perfect. Okay, so inside of this, what I'm going to do is the following. And this is going to seem almost a little alien if you feel uncomfortable with regular expressions, but I'm going to try to explain to the best of my ability what's actually happening here. So we'll say caret, and then in parentheses, I'm going to pass in question mark, capital P, and then the less than and greater sign, and then inside of that, we'll pass PK, square brackets, dash, backslash, W, and then we'll say plus. That all goes inside the parentheses, and then we'll say /$ $. And then we'll say views dot school detail view, and then pass that in as underscore view. So we hadn't actually been looking at that detail page yet. Now we're going to link it. And then we'll say name is equal to detail. And we'll save that. Okay, so what is actually happening here? Well, essentially what we're doing is when someone comes to that school list page, when someone actually clicks on this school's name in that list view, the href is just going to essentially return a single number, the actual number that corresponds as a primary key, or in other words, a PK, primary key. Then if we go to our urls.py file, inside our application, that's this guy, the primary key that we're actually grabbing. And what we're going to be able to do is link to that school's particular detail view. Now back here under URL patterns, basically what we're saying with this regular expression is grab the basic app extension of the domain name / and then whatever this number happens to be for the primary key, and take that in as the school details view. And let me make sure that I have a comma here separating these two guys. Looks like I need to add one in, so we'll have a comma there. Save that, and now we have the school list view, and we should also have the detail view for that particular school. So I will save that, and if this regular expression is really confusing, don't worry. It's usually something that you kind of reference the documentation for. I would never expect someone to have this memorized right off the bat unless they work with regular expressions all the time. But as you get more and more used to particular patterns in your code and web design, there are certain regular expressions that you're going to find yourself kind of memorizing. For instance, we probably already memorized the basic home page, which is just that caret $. Okay, so let's actually run this. We'll say python manage.py, run server, hit enter, and let me bring up the browser. Okay, so here we are at the home page. Looks like that's working. Let's come over to schools, and now we see that all the schools are actually links. So we can click on the first school, and it says welcome to the school detail page. It's kind of large since I'm zoomed in here a little bit, and it's a jumbotron. But here we see the school details, and we've looped through all the students in that school. Said Mikey, who was 10 years old, John, who was 12 years old. Perfect. We can come back to schools, try it with new second school, and same thing. Here we see the second school details, Mrs. Smith, New York, and we see Lauren and Sarah. So remember, back when we were setting up the database, it was female students for the new second school. So it looks like everything's matching up perfectly. And those are the basics of how you can use a list view and a detail view. So jumping back to views.py, kind of the whole point of this is that you can quickly use list view and detail view instead of having to play around with those model.objects.all, etc. We saw that we had to do a little bit of that with the detail view, but basically none of that with the list view. And you can always specify the context object name that you want to return. All right, hope you found this useful, and I will see you at the next lecture where we begin talking about CRUD applications. Everyone, and welcome to this final lecture where we're going to be discussing CRUD. Now, you may have heard of this term, CRUD, before in web development, but what does it actually mean? Contrary to what you might think it means, it really stands for create, retrieve, update, and delete. And this process of creating, retrieving, updating, and deleting is inherent to almost every website. Pretty much any website with users has the ability for a user or an administrator to create content, retrieve prior content, update that content, or delete that content. Now, we pretty much already know how to retrieve things by using the connection between the URLs, the models, and the views.py file. What we're going to be learning about here is more on creating, updating, and deleting information from our web application. Whenever you work with models and databases, you will need to perform those 4 basic actions, and luckily, Django has class-based views to simplify this entire process for you. We'll start off by exploring how to use the Create View class. Now, as a quick note, while we are using this Create View class in the programming section of this lecture, we will purposefully induce a few errors to clarify where certain variable names are coming from. So I'm not making mistakes as I'm coding along. I will actually be inducing those errors on purpose, and I'll remind you of that as we continue programming. Once we've worked through the create view class, working with the update view and delete view classes will be very straightforward. Another quick note, there's going to be a lot of interaction between your urls.py, views.py, and models.py file, as well as all your template files. If you ever get stuck on an error, I want you to triple check that your code has matching the notes exactly, or is matching what I've shown you here in the video lecture. The nature of the interaction between all the files is going to make it almost impossible for me to give you good help on this topic in the Q&A forums. So if you ever get stuck on anything and you're really stuck, make sure that you're actually following along with the video exactly, or just go ahead and download the associated files for this lecture. Alright, let's get started and hop over to the Atom text editor. Okay, here I am at the Atom text editor, and over on the right I also have a browser open to the page that we've been working with throughout this entire section of the course. I have the home page, and we learned how to connect templates and also inject content into this home page. I can click on schools, see a list of all the schools, select first school, and then come to the school detail page. And then I can always click on admin to go to the admin page as well. Let's go back to schools, and we'll see a list of schools here. The first thing I want to do is show you how we could possibly create a new school using create view. In order to do that, let's hop over to our views.py file under basic app. And I'm going to create a new class that, as you may have guessed, is going to be called school create view. So I will collapse this directory for a second, and before we actually get started with this, let's import the views we're going to be using. Right now we're importing view, template view, list view, and what I can do to put these in multiple lines is have some parentheses here, and anything wrapped inside these parentheses can then go on multiple lines. So I'm importing view, template view, list view, detail view. We're already familiar with those. And then I'm also going to be importing create view, update view, and then delete view. And basically what these views are going to do and help us out with is create view will help us create new additions to our models. Update is going to take an existing entry in your model and allow you to update it. And then delete view will allow you to take something that exists there and delete it. So let's start off with create view, which is going to allow us to essentially create a new school easily. I will scroll down over here, and underneath school detail view, I will say something like class, school, create view, and then we'll just pass in create view. We'll inherit from that. And then what I'm going to do under the create view is I will say model is equal to models.school. And then I will save that, and whenever we create a view, we want to make sure that it's linked to some sort of URL. So I'll bring back my directory tree and come over to the urls.py file of my actual application, and I'm going to add another line there for another URL. So let's actually edit this a little bit. Right now I have this sort of regular expression, and I'm going to simplify this. Instead of having this in brackets here, let's just make this say digit plus. And basically what this is doing is it's taking the primary key of the school as the display. And what I want to do is create a new URL link here. And this will take in as a regular expression just create /$. So what this says is if someone goes to the domain page /basic_app/create, it's going to allow us to create a new school. And here we'll say views dot school create view dot as view. Remember, we have to do that for class-based views, and we'll go ahead and give it a name, and the name we're going to give it is just create, so we can reference it later. And since I added a new item to this list, I want to make sure that they're separated by commas. Okay, so just to expand this a little bit so we can see this in a tiny bit more detail, here I've just added this URL, create views.schoolCreate as view, name is create. We're going to save that. And then what we're going to do is check it out over here, and we will get some errors, but I'm going to walk you through them so we can get a better understanding of why we're getting these errors. So I will come back to schools, refresh, and then I'll click on first school. It says welcome to school detail page. All right, so far so good. I'll come back up here to where it says basic app, and I'm going to try to go to create. I'll hit enter, and note what happens here. It says improperly configured at basic app create. Using model form mixin, base class of school create view without the fields attribute is prohibited. So that's the error I want you to learn how to read in case you ever encounter it. So basically what this is saying is, hey, you want to create a view, but you didn't specify what fields are prohibited and what fields are allowed. Well, that's easy enough to fix. We'll come back to views.py, and over here, under create, just like we did back when we were working with models, we're going to define the fields that we will allow a user to create. So the school had 3 main fields: the name, the principal, and location. And this almost acts like a security measure. Maybe you don't want someone to edit the location of a school or the name of a school, etc. We'll just pass in all the fields for now. Principal, and then location. And I'm going to save this. And as I refresh this page, I should see probably another error. And there it is. So template does not exist. Well, that makes sense. I never actually created a template for this school creation page. But what's interesting here is it tells you that it's looking for basic app school form. And basically what that means is that Django, that create view, is automatically creating a default HTML template that it's expecting. And it's expecting it to be in the format of all lowercase, the model name, in our case it's school, underscore, and then form. So let's add that in. And I would always suggest that you use the defaults there. So underneath templates, basic app, I will create a new file, and I will call it what it was looking for, school underscore form.html. And it makes sense that we need some sort of form for the editor or user to come in and create a new school. And let's show you how we can create this school form page. First things first though, I want to say extends from the basic app slash and then the basic app base, which was basic app underscore base.html. Okay, so that's going to allow me to extend that template, and then let's have in our body block. So we'll call block body underscore block. And since I have a block, I will say end block as well. All right, now let's actually put something here, and this is what the user is going to see when they actually try to create a new school. And I'm going to essentially think ahead and know that I'm also going to add an update view later on. So keep that in mind as I'm working here. Usually you wouldn't just know this all off the top of your head. And in this header, or heading 1, I'm going to use some logic. I'll have an if statement in my template tagging, and I will say if not form.instance.pk, and we'll explain what that means in a little bit. I will say create school. And then since I know I'm also going to add an update view later on, meaning update a school that already exists, I will say else update school. And then since I have an if, I always need to end if. So what do these lines actually mean? Well, basically what I'm saying is the following. I'm going to extend from basic app, have the body block, and the heading of this form page, that create page, is going to check if the instance of the primary key exists or not. If it does not exist, that means this is a new school, and we're going to create the school. Otherwise, we're updating a school that currently exists. And this will make more sense as we actually develop the update view. But hopefully you get the basic idea that I'm checking first, hey, does the primary of that key of that school exist? Well, in that case, if it doesn't exist, I'm creating a school. Else, if it already does exist, then I'm updating the school. And then finally, to actually update school, we need to take in, with a form, some information. And we actually just need to specify the method as post. We don't need to have a class or action here. You could have a class with this bootstrap stuff we've been learning about, but we'll keep it simple for now. As always, with any form, we need to have our CSRF token. CSRF token, and this should be underscore token. And then we're going to inject our form, as we've seen earlier, as P. And then finally, we'll say input. The type is going to be a submit button. And let's give it a class just so it looks a little nicer. Since we are working with Bootstrap, we'll say it's a btn-primary. Always nice to flex those Bootstrap muscles. And let's give it a value of submit. We'll save that. And hopefully that worked out this error. Remember, that was the school form.html. And it's really important that you have the ability to read these sort of errors. Throughout a lot of the course, we've been kind of avoiding errors to begin with, but now I really want you to get familiar and be able to read, oh, template does not exist. Well, that means I need to check out what template it's expecting. All right, let's refresh this. And perfect, we see create a school. Now let's try to actually create a school. We'll give it the name of the school, my brand new school. The principal will be, I don't know, someone named Larry. And the location, we'll say it's in, I don't know, Panama. We'll say submit, and boom, we have another problem. It says improperly configured at basic app create. And it says it has no URL to redirect to. Either provide a URL or, and this is what we're going to be doing, define a get underscore absolute underscore URL method on the model. So let's follow those directions and actually do it. Okay, so I'm going to come over to the models, and I'm going to look for school, and it told me that I should define a get absolute URL method for this model. So let's follow those instructions. I'll say def get absolute underscore URL, and we'll pass in self. And then what we're going to do is basically reverse and tell it what primary key we want this school to be created with. So what we need to do is actually import reverse from URL resolvers, which we have seen before. Say from django.core.url resolvers import reverse. And that means I can use it down here, where I will just return reverse. And what I'm going to do here is call basic underscore app, the detail view, not the detail view as in the importing, but the actual detail in the views.py file. And then we need to add some keyword arguments as a parameter. And the keyword argument I'm going to pass here is pk for primary key. And the value for that is just self.pk. So let's save that. And again, learning how to kind of read and roll with the punches on some of these error codes. So it says get absolute URL method. We did that already. Let's refresh this. It may ask us to continue. That's fine. It says welcome to the school detail page. School details, my brand new school, Larry in Panama. So what was actually going on here? Basically what happened is after we created that view, we never told Django where it should go to. We never said, oh, go do something after you created the view, which is why Django was requesting for a get absolute URL. And basically what we said is, okay, go back and reverse and figure out that you should go to the detail page or whatever the primary key is of the school you just made. In our case, this is basic app 4. Your number may be different, however. And that's the very basics of having a create view. So if I go back to the list of schools, I can see I have my brand new school and my brand new school. So the reason it's inserted twice here is because we basically did it twice while we were kind of fixing some of those errors. But don't worry, we'll fix that when we learn how to delete views. But first, let's learn how to work with update view. And a lot of the work has already been done for us since we did a lot of stuff while we were doing the create view. So school update view should actually be quite simple as well. Let's come over to views.py, and I will create a new class called school update view. And I would recommend that you name your classes basically the way I'm doing it, with the model name and then create view or update view or detail view, etc. And then I'm going to inherit from update view. And this one's quite simple. Again, we're going to specify what fields we want to be updated. Now this is where maybe you can think about, okay, who's going to be updating this? What kind of user permissions will they have? And also, what makes sense for updating a school? Does it make sense to update a school's principal? Well, yeah, that makes sense. Principals can change. Does it make sense to update a school's name? Maybe. What about the location of a school? Well, probably not. Schools usually don't move around that much. So let's just say you can only update the name and the principal of a school. Obviously, your own situations are going to be unique, and you'll have to make that call. And what we're going to do here is once we have this, we'll just connect it to the model. We'll say model is equal to models dot, and in our case, it's the school model. We'll save this, And then what we're going to do is come back to urls.py and actually set up a URL for our updating. Inside this urls.py file for our application, what I'm going to do is copy this detail view, paste it again, and this is basically the same view I want, except I want to clarify some sort of update extension. So basically, if I go to basic_app/update/ and then the number of the primary key of the school, it will let me update that school. So I need to change this from detail view to update view as view, and then I will change the name to detail to update, and then let me save that. And then the next thing we have to do is actually edit the HTML file or the template file that relates to the school detail page. So let's hop over to that. And right now, this is our detail page. And it just says for the information of the school, list of students, etc. And what we will do is outside of this, in fact, let's put it outside this div, but before the end block, I'll create a new div inside its own container, and it'll just be a paragraph with an anchor tag inside of it. And this will be a URL template. And this will be a URL template that takes you to the basic_app with the name update. And we'll pass in an argument, pk school_detail.pk. And let's actually give this a class so it looks a little nicer. We'll say this is class of, for Bootstrap, we can say btn. We'll give it warning, you can give it success, whatever you want, but maybe a warning makes sense if you're going to update something. It's kind of a yellow hue by original nature, and then we actually want to have some sort of text here that tells you you're going to update this. All right, let's save this, and we'll refresh this page and see what happens. So now if I scroll down a little bit, I see this update button, and we can always zoom out so it's a little more clear. So now on the detail page, I can see this update button. You may have to scroll down depending on how zoomed in you are, and if I click on it, I get the form and the option to update the school, and only the fields that I specified, the name and principal. So let's try to change the name of the school. Actually, let's just change the principal to something really obvious, like Mr. Obvious. That should be a really obvious change. We'll submit it, and then it takes us back to that school's detail page. That's what we were working with when we said here on the href URL, basic app, update, and then pk school detail pk. That allows us to link whatever school we're actually updating with. So welcome to the school page. I can see now first school has the principal Mr. Obvious. And if I come back to schools, click on first school, I can see that that change has been permanently done. Great. So now we learned how to create views and how to update views. The last thing we need to do is figure out how we can delete views. So let's go back to our actual editor. I'll bring back my directory tree. And what I'm going to do is come over here to the views.py, and we'll create our last and final view, which is the school delete view. We'll have delete view here, and this one's going to be slightly different from everything we've done so far as updating and creating views, but it's actually not so bad. First thing you have to do is say model is equal to models.school. Connect the models, that makes sense as far as what we're going to delete. And then the next thing I have to add in is a success URL variable, or attribute I should say, because this is a class. So we'll create an attribute called success_URL. And what we're going to do is use the reverse_lazy function. So I need to go up and import that, and I'll explain what it is right after I import it. We'll say from Django.core.URL resolvers, and it's actually from the same place where we imported reverse from. So we can import reverse or reverse_lazy. And if you're familiar with programming, you may have heard of the term lazily evaluated. And what we're going to do is all the way down here, and it's actually telling us we need to still finish that off, where it says success URL, we will call reverse_lazy and pass in that we want to go to the basic app and the list view. So what this success URL means is, all right, once you've successfully deleted a school, I want you to go back to the list page of the basic app and show all the schools. And theoretically, once you're done deleting it, that school should no longer be on that list. The reason we use reverse lazy is that we don't want this evaluated completely when running our .py file. We only want it to wait until it's actually called as a success. And as with all the other views we've been working with, we need to go ahead and add a urls.py that actually matches with this particular view. So we'll come back here to urls.py, and let me collapse this to see a little more room. And again, this is going to look really similar to update. Instead of updating something though, we're going to be deleting it. So we'll hit enter, and I'm going to change this name from update to delete. I'll change this update to delete as well. And then here where it says update, we'll change that to delete. So I should be able to go to basic app / delete and then any primary key and start getting some options for deleting stuff. But in order to do that, I should have some sort of HTML file. So we'll go ahead and go with the default HTML file that's expected, and we'll add it in right now. We don't need to see those errors anymore. And what we do is we say school _ confirm _ delete.html. And this is going to be the page that's actually shown when someone tries to manually delete something from the database. We'll say extends, and we're going to go from the basic app / basic app _ base.html file that I have here. And then let's start our block. We'll have our body block. And with any block, we need to end the block. And what we're going to have here is basically just says h1, and we'll say delete, and it will automatically pass in a context object called school, or whatever the lowercase version of your model is. Remember, we previously covered how to create your own context object names. If you come back here to views and scroll up a little bit, we talked about it here, context object name. The basic one for detail, that I encourage you to just use the default, is the lowercase version of your model. So we'll use that. We expect school to be here, and what we're going to call off of it is the name and say ? So what this is going to show is a heading that says, hey, delete that school's name ? And then we'll just have a simple form. This simple form is just going to say method is post. With any form, we always need a CSRF token. And it's going to have an input. The input will just be submit. And now we can kind of play with the classes of Bootstrap. And I've been waiting to use this a long time, but we can finally use the danger button. We don't need to actually give this a name, but we should give it a value. That way it says something. We'll just have it say delete. And below this, if you don't want to delete, we should have some sort of link that goes back to cancel, or at least some sort of text. You can have this be a button, another form, whatever you want. I'm just going to have it be an anchor tag with the word cancel inside of it. And for the href, we'll have it take us back to that school's detail page. So we'll have a URL template here that goes to basic app, or whatever the name of your application is, detail, in that URL, and then we'll say pk is equal to school dot primary key. So again, we're grabbing the primary key off that school context object that's returned just the same way we grabbed its name. Because remember that detail URL, if we go back to urls.py, over here under the term detail, we're expecting some sort of primary key to be inserted, which is why we've been having to pass it in as an argument in these HTML template files. Okay, so let's save this, and we'll refresh our schools page. And let's go ahead and try to delete school number 4, because I have a duplicate there. So up here in the URL, I will say basic app, delete, /4, hit enter, and it says delete my brand new school. And we can see here, we can click cancel, which is going to take us back to that detail page of that particular school, or I can hit delete. So let's try it. We'll hit delete, and there you go. That school has now been deleted. Let's try it one more time, make sure it's actually working. Try it on that other brand new school. And whoops, I actually need to enter this manually. Later on, you can add links if you want. Obviously, you should be very careful adding delete links all over the place. But here I am at delete/3, delete my brand new school, and we'll hit delete. Okay, perfect, it's all working. Later on, we'll also learn how to use slugs instead of just primary keys, where slugs are essentially the name of objects, lowercase, with dashes in between any spaces. And if you're familiar with web development at all, you've probably heard that term before. Okay, I hope you enjoyed learning about updating, creating, and deleting views, and I hope that this makes your life a lot easier. As you find yourself programming with larger projects in Django, you're going to be using those views all the time. And that's basically the whole point of Django, to make your life a little easier as you try to focus on what's really important, developing your own website. Thanks, and I'll see you at the next lecture.